Chapter 1. I was born a princess, yet my life was never a fairy tale. From the moment I entered this world, I was abandoned, left to grow up in the cold, empty halls of the Ruby Palace, a place meant to house unwanted remnants of the imperial family. My father, the almighty Emperor Claude de Algerobelia, never once acknowledged my existence. I was a shadow in his empire, a name only whispered behind closed doors, a forgotten daughter left to wither. But then, on my 9th birthday, something changed. Drawn by the shimmering lights of a grand imperial banquet, I stepped out of the only world I had ever known and into the gardens of the emperor's palace. And there, under the glow of moonlight, I saw him for the first time, my father. The man whose blood ran through my veins, yet whose eyes held nothing but indifference as he passed me by. Still, I was mesmerized. I told myself that if I tried hard enough, if I became worthy enough, perhaps one day, he would look at me as a daughter instead of a stranger. For years, I worked tirelessly, learning grace and skill, perfecting every word and movement so that I would no longer be the fragile, pitiful princess left to be forgotten. And then, on the day of my debut into high society, the day I had longed for, the day I had hoped would change everything, she appeared. Jeanette Margarita. She was beautiful, bright, and effortlessly charming, with the imperial jeweled eyes that marked her as one of our blood. She stepped into the ballroom and into my father's life as if she had always belonged. As if she were the daughter he had been waiting for all along. The moment Duke Alpheus introduced her as his lost child, my world began to crumble. But that was only the beginning. Jeanette, the sister I had never known, was welcomed into the Emerald Palace, the true home of princesses. Meanwhile, I remained locked away in the Ruby Palace, my existence further overshadowed by her golden light. And despite it all, despite knowing she had taken the place I had once dreamed of, I couldn't hate her. She was kind. She wanted to be my family. So, I helped her. I guided her through the cruel, treacherous world of the imperial court, teaching her the things I had painfully learned on my own. And then, the day came when she turned 18. Countess Rosalia, her maternal aunt, set a plan into motion, one that would ensure Jeanette's place on the throne. A poisoned glass. A false accusation. A betrayal so cruel and final that I never saw it coming. I was to be executed. No trial. No chance to speak the truth. Only the cold, merciless judgment of my father, who had never seen me as his daughter to begin with. I was dragged before the Empire and hanged like a criminal. My only ally, Lillian York, the one person who had ever stood by my side, met the same fate. And in the end, my father felt nothing. Even when the truth was revealed, even when he realized I had been innocent, he did not grieve me. The Empire did not mourn me. My name was erased, forgotten, replaced by the golden princess who had taken everything. Jeanette, who cried for me, who suffered guilt in my place, still lived the life that should have been mine. With my father's love, with her fiancé's warmth, she moved on. She lived. And I, Athanasia de Algerobelia, was nothing but a tragic footnote in the Empire's history. But then, I woke up. Breathless, heart pounding, my hands clutching the silken sheets of my bed. The visions of my future burned into my mind, the cruel fate awaiting me seared into my soul. I saw it all, the betrayal, the execution, the way my father looked at me without a shred of remorse. I refused to let it happen. I would not be the forgotten princess. I would not be a victim of this empire's whims. If the future wanted to erase me, then I would rewrite it. Even if it meant changing everything. Even if it meant making my father, the coldest man in the empire, love me. Even if it meant becoming someone the world would never dare to forget. I would live. No matter the cost. 3 years old. I wandered through the grand corridors, a small bundle of flowers clutched in my tiny hands, feigning innocence as if I had merely lost my way. The Garnet Palace stood in stark contrast to my home, the Ruby Palace. While the Ruby Palace shimmered with ruby-encrusted walls and golden filigree, the Garnet Palace was an expanse of pristine white marble, reflecting the light in a way that made it feel almost ethereal. The walls were smooth, unadorned except for delicate carvings of laurel wreaths and celestial motifs. Tall, arched windows lined the halls, their heavy crimson velvet drapes partially drawn, allowing beams of filtered light to bathe the space in a soft, golden glow. A hushed stillness lingered in the air, broken only by the faint crackling of torches mounted on the marble walls. Unlike the Ruby Palace, where warmth and grandeur radiated from every ornate fixture, the Garnet Palace carried an air of solemnity, like a temple untouched by time. The scent of sandalwood and aged parchment hinted at the countless decrees and documents housed within. A plush deep red carpet stretched before me, its fabric thick and luxurious, beneath my tiny feet. Compared to the bright openness of the Ruby Palace, this place felt colder, more restrained, a reflection of the man who ruled it. Yep. This is definitely the Garnet Palace. I stifled a yawn, my small body already growing tired. Well, I am just a kid now. Deciding that the grand staircase was the best spot for a nap, conveniently where my father would be sure to notice me, I plopped down at the foot of the stairs and promptly dozed off. A few minutes later, a firm, unfamiliar hand grasped me, lifting me effortlessly from my slumber. The sudden movement stirred me awake, and as my blurry vision sharpened, I found myself staring into a pair of piercing, ice-blue eyes. Claude de Alger Obelia. My father. The infamous tyrant emperor. His golden hair caught the faint candlelight, casting a halo-like glow around his head. If not for the sharp, cold expression he wore, he might have looked almost divine. Dressed in a simple white Roman-style robe, the fabric draped elegantly over his broad frame, revealing part of his sculpted chest. Gold embroidery traced the edges of the garment, its simplicity only enhancing his untouchable, godlike aura. I blinked drowsily. Whoa. Hello. What took you so long? As if to punctuate my point, my stomach let out a loud growl. How embarrassing. I instinctively sucked my thumb and gazed up at Claude with wide, pleading eyes. Please feed me. Another growl. Father stared at me in silence before shifting his attention to the man beside him, Sir Felix Robain, his ever-loyal knight. Felix. Before I could react, Father tossed me over to Felix like I was a sack of potatoes. Your Majesty. Felix caught me with ease, though I caught the brief flicker of panic in his eyes before he let out a nervous chuckle. Father, already losing interest, turned away. I'll have tea with my guest. The Imperial Tea Salon. The tea salon was a grand chamber lined with towering mahogany bookshelves, their spines filled with records of imperial history. High-arched windows overlooked the vast palace gardens, their glass panes catching the golden glow of the afternoon sun. Above us, a massive crystal chandelier shimmered, its delicate arrangement of lights twinkling like distant stars. A lavish tea set rested atop an ornate marble table, surrounded by an array of cakes, pastries, and fruit tarts, each more decadent than the last. The sugary aroma made my mouth water, and I had to fight the urge to lunge at the treats immediately. I was placed onto a softly cushioned ivory sofa, my tiny legs dangling well above the floor. My eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and excitement as I turned my attention to the man across from me. Claude de Alger Obelia. The Emperor. My father. And he looked thoroughly unimpressed. He rested his chin on his palm, ice-blue eyes locked onto me with an expression that could only be described as bored curiosity. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I shifted in my seat, my little hands clutching the silver spoon as I debated whether stuffing my face would make me look cuter or more ridiculous. Father hailed. Speak. I blinked up at him. Bah? A flicker of annoyance passed through his features. You called me Dada earlier. He leaned back slightly, his golden hair catching the light as he studied me. Say something else. I tilted my head. Kaik. He sighed. Something intelligent. I frowned, puffing up my cheeks in frustration. Dada, wow, so big. Big Dada. I flailed my arms, for emphasis. Father stared at me. His face remained unreadable, but I could tell his patience was already thinning. And? And, tea hot. Silence. Felix, standing by the door, coughed into his fist. Father pinched the bridge of his nose. Is that all? I nodded proudly. His lips parted slightly, as if contemplating his life choices. Huh. I suppose I expected too much from a child. I gasped, placing a tiny hand on my chest. How rude. I is not child. I is Atha. Father blinked. What? I pouted. Not child. Atha. Felix, now visibly struggling to hold back laughter, took a step forward. Your Majesty, I believe she's trying to say her name. Father exhaled sharply, his gaze dropping to the tea set. He reached for his cup, lifting it with a grace that made even the simplest motion look regal. Fine. Atha. I beamed, kicking my legs happily. Dada good. He froze mid-sip, his blue eyes flickering toward me with an unreadable expression. A long silence followed. Then, setting his teacup down with a soft clink, he muttered, "Ha. This is exhausting. The Imperial Tea Salon. Felix, leave us." Yes, Your Majesty. Felix bowed with precision and exited the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The air in the salon grew heavier, as if the absence of his presence made the space feel colder. My father's piercing gaze landed on me, his expression unreadable, like a statue carved from ice. His sharp blue eyes seemed to strip away everything else in the room, focusing only on me, the little intruder in his grand palace. He leaned forward, his voice cold as he asked, "Do you know who I am?" I nodded, swallowing the last bite of my cake and flashing him a wide grin. Dada. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face, something I couldn't quite grasp. It was so fleeting, I almost thought I imagined it. He paused, as if considering my response, but before I could analyze it further, I leaned back into the cushions and patted my stomach with a satisfied sigh. Appa. I'm full. My small hands reached out to the delicate porcelain teacup filled with warm milk, trying my best to drink it with some semblance of grace, but my tiny fingers fumbled. A bit of milk spilled over, drenching the front of my soft pink dress. My father exhaled sharply, the sound of his irritation cutting through the stillness. Felix. The door opened swiftly, and Felix appeared, his ever-watchful eyes scanning the scene with practiced ease. Yes, Your Majesty? Without a word, my father gestured toward me, his voice distant, as if he were speaking to someone who wasn't even present. Give her to the maids to be cleaned properly. Yes, Your Majesty. Felix bowed low and approached me with gentle hands. His touch was careful as he lifted me up, cradling me in his arms with a tenderness I hadn't expected. His expression softened for a moment before he returned his gaze to my father, awaiting further instruction. I, however, was too preoccupied with the mess on my dress to care much about their conversation. Felix's handkerchief brushed against my face, wiping away the spilled milk with a soft and warm motion. I kicked my legs impatiently, grumbling softly under my breath. The taste of cake still lingered on my tongue, but my father's indifference left me yearning for more. The Garnet Palace's bath chamber. The bath chamber was an intimate, serene space, the white marble walls and floor reflecting the soft glow of golden sconces. The air was heavy with the calming scent of lavender and chamomile, making it feel like a sanctuary from the rest of the palace's cold grandeur. The maids, who had expertly scrubbed the dirt and remnants of cake from my skin, were now finishing the last delicate touches on my new dress. The fabric, soft and billowy, felt different from the plainness of my previous gown, light and airy, a stark contrast to the dullness of what I had worn before. The maids worked diligently, their skilled hands fastening the final button on the back of my dress. It was made of a soft pastel pink silk, the material gleaming faintly under the gentle light. Unlike my last dress, which had been simple and unadorned, this new one was far more intricate. It featured a delicate lace trim along the edges of the sleeves and hem, and tiny satin ribbons crisscrossed over the bodice, adding a touch of elegance. The skirt flared out slightly at the waist, giving it a whimsical, almost fairy tale quality. I looked down at my old dress, pale, plain, and unremarkable. The fabric had been stiff, and the color dull, making me feel like I was wearing a ghost of a dress. In contrast, this new one seemed to shine with the promise of something far more refined, a clear step up in elegance that I couldn't help but appreciate. It felt almost like a transformation, like I wasn't just being scrubbed clean on the outside but was somehow becoming something more polished, more noticed. As the maids finished their work, one of them smiled at me warmly. "She's very well behaved." Lillian, who had been standing in the doorway, rushed in, her expression frazzled. She had clearly been worried about me. Her eyes softened when she saw me in the new dress, and she held up a fresh gown with a relieved sigh. "Princess, I was so worried." I smiled up at her, still a little dizzy from my earlier adventures. "Ape. I'm fine." The warmth of her smile reassured me, and the tense lines around her face softened. One of the maids finished the last button, giving Lillian a brief nod, and then stepped back. "She's all set." Lillian sighed in relief, brushing a lock of hair away from her face. "Thank you." Just as she was about to say something more, there was a soft knock at the door. Knock, knock. Felix stepped in, his usual expression of professionalism not quite hiding a hint of concern. "Miss Lillian, His Majesty would like to speak to you." Lillian's body tensed at the mention of my father. She nodded quickly, trying to mask her anxiety. "Yes." I reached my arms toward her, my little voice demanding attention. "Yaya." "Lily." Her eyes softened instantly at the sight of me reaching for her, and without hesitation, she knelt down to scoop me up into her arms. I nestled against her, feeling a sense of security wash over me, despite the ominous nature of my father's summons. Lillian's hand gently stroked my hair, but her gaze was distant as she began to move toward the door. I didn't want her to go, not yet, so I clung tighter to her, not wanting to be left behind. The throne room of the Garnet Palace was vast and intimidating, its high ceilings adorned with intricate murals of the empire's history. Crimson banners lined the walls, and at the center stood the golden throne, where father sat like an untouchable deity. Lillian knelt before him, her head bowed. "Forgive me, Your Majesty." I wasn't paying much attention to her, though, my focus was on making sure she was safe. I waddled up quickly and grabbed onto father's pant leg, looking up at him with wide, pleading eyes. Felix entered and immediately began defending Lillian. I smiled when father spoke, his voice cool. "I will be looking into the princess from now on." His gaze flickered to Lillian, sharp as ice. I clung tighter to father's leg. "No hurt, Lily." Father let out a quiet sigh, but his expression didn't soften. Felix seemed unsure how to react. "Felix," father said firmly. "Take them back to the Ruby Palace. We'll talk tomorrow." I looked up at father, beaming. "Dada, dada." As we left, I waved back at him. "Bibi, dada." To my surprise, father smiled. A shiver ran down my spine. As the days passed, rumors about the emperor's unusual affection for the princess began to ripple through the palace. The servants, normally focused on their duties, couldn't help but gossip as they worked. The stories of the princess's charm spread like wildfire, and it wasn't long before whispers filled the air. In the kitchens, where the aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the halls, one maid couldn't help but laugh as she overheard her co-workers. "Did you hear?" the maid asked with a gleam in her eye. "The Emperor, His Majesty, smiled yesterday." All because the princess gave him a hug. Another maid, equally excited, leaned in. "I heard she even tried to show him how to play with one of those strange toys the nobles bring." He looked so confused, but then he actually played along. "She's got him wrapped around her little finger, I swear." A third maid chuckled. "She's adorable, isn't she? I saw her in the gardens this morning. Running around in that little dress of hers, laughing. It was like the whole palace just softened around her." The chatter continued, more excited and less hushed as the weeks went on. The servants couldn't help but notice how differently the emperor acted in the princess's presence. He, who was usually so reserved and cold, now seemed to show a flicker of warmth when Athanasia was near. But not everyone was so convinced. The nobility, who often gathered in the main palace for official matters, were quick to dismiss the rumors. They had yet to witness anything for themselves, and found it hard to believe the cold emperor had truly changed. "I don't buy it," one noblewoman scoffed as she sipped her wine at a grand dinner. "I haven't seen her once in the public areas. She's been tucked away in those private residences. The garnet and ruby palaces, they're so secluded. If His Majesty really cared, don't you think we'd have seen her by now?" A nobleman, his brow furrowed, nodded in agreement. "Exactly. No one's had any contact with the princess, and His Majesty is hardly one to openly show affection. It's all just speculation, and rumors." "His daughter?" "She's nowhere to be seen." Another noblewoman, a young and sharp-eyed observer, smirked. "I wonder if it's all just for show. Perhaps the emperor feels compelled to make some kind of public display of affection for the girl. But unless we see her in the main palace, we can't take it seriously." They debated the rumors further, speculating on every little detail. But the truth remained in the shadows of the garnet and ruby palaces, the quiet residences where only a handful of people were ever granted access. The rumors, however, continued to swirl, spreading faster than anyone could control them. And despite the noble's skepticism, the servants knew there was more truth to it than they'd like to admit. The emperor, despite his usual coldness, had begun to show signs of a father's love. But for now, the princess remained a mystery, glimpsed only by those fortunate enough to be in the emperor's private residence. Like, comment and subscribe to be notified for updates in the series.